the right edges.
Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Hayward Alto. I'm the Consular Chief of the U.S. Embassy here in Bern, and this is my colleague.
Hi, I'm Jack Pan. I'm the Visa Chief here at U.S. Embassy Bern. We're very excited to discuss travel opportunities for business travelers going to the United States. This webinar is meant to be interactive. After our short presentation, we will have a question and answer segment.
Economic cooperation is one of the foundations of the U.S.-Swiss relationship, and we in the consular section work closely with our commercial and economic teams to facilitate business travel to the United States. We understand that this is extremely difficult during in the times of COVID, and that's why we are here. We want to explain the current U.S. requirements for business travelers and what Swiss travelers need to do to travel to the United States. The current U.S. Travel requirements state that travelers present in the Schengen area, the United Kingdom, and Ireland for 14 days prior to travel are suspended entry into the United States. Fortunately, there are several exceptions to these requirements, including family members of U.S. citizens, security, public health, and humanitarian cases.
And here's where what's important for you. How do I travel to the United States? So it's a two-pronged process. First and foremost, what does that mean? Do you have an Esta or a valid visa? If you already have a valid Esta or a valid visa, then you must also qualify for what is called a national interest exception. We'll discuss what that means a bit later, but know that you have to have both a qualified Esta or visa and a national interest exception. Now, we're going to talk about national interest exceptions later, and if you feel like you qualify for one and you don't have an Esta or a visa, apply for a visa and we will process the national interest exception within that application. If you need to apply for a visa, we suggest you go to the U.S. Embassy website and follow the procedures there.
As Jack already talked about, the national interest exception works with Esta or a U.S. visa to permit you to enter the United States under the current requirements. This national interest exception is valid for one entry and is good for 30 days after its issuance. So this basically means that you have 30 days after we have issued you a national interest waiver to enter the United States. And the national interest exception will then expire if you do not use it. And unfortunately, it cannot be reused and you have to apply again for another national interest exception. Unfortunately, there are no exceptions for tourist travel at this point. The State Department is constantly reviewing conditions in the United States and elsewhere. When it is safe to resume tourist travel, a decision will be announced later.
So, what are the national interest exception requirements? So those are based on the needs of both the traveler and the United States. If you are applying for a national interest exception, I want you to ask yourself these questions. First and foremost, are you the spouse of a U.S. citizen? And are you the parent of a U.S. citizen under the age of 21? If you answered yes to these, you are categorically exempt from the suspension of travel. Of course, we want to help you unify with your U.S. citizen families. We recommend that when you travel, you bring documentation that demonstrates the relationship you have with the U.S. citizen. Secondarily, are you a student or are you a research scholar traveling to the U.S.? In consular lingo, that means are you an F or M or a certain type of J visa travelers? Okay. Furthermore, does your travel involve mitigation of the COVID pandemic? Are you helping to develop a vaccine? Are you involved with the logistics of vaccine delivery? Of course, we want to facilitate travel for those instances. Or what is the economic impact of your travel to the United States? Do you have investments? Are you a bilateral treaty investor? Do you manage factories in the US that require your presence? If you can explain that, we can help you process the national interest exception. And then finally, ask yourself and help us answer, why is this travel necessary right now? Can it be done virtually? Why do you need to be in the United States? If you can map that out for us, it'll really help us process your national interest exception waiver.
Now you're probably asking yourselves, well, I need a national interest exception. How do I get it? For those that apply for a visa, as Jack already mentioned, for those that apply for and receive a visa, we will automatically provide a national interest exception for you. But before you actually apply for a visa, we ask that you think about the previous questions that Jack raised, so that you do actually meet those requirements for a national interest exception.
Okay. And if you already have a visa or Esta and want to apply for a national interest exception, please contact our public mailbox, Bern, NIV@state.gov. We'll put this in the comments as well. In your email, we need you to explain why you're traveling, and please be as detailed as possible. We sometimes get these emails where we ask, what is your purpose of travel? The answer, business. And now we have to write another email. What type of business? Investment. What type of investment? So to avoid this type of tennis match emailing, please be as detailed as possible when we ask you these questions. It'll really help us process your national interest exceptions. If you're traveling with a group, please let us know the group members. We ask that you provide us a copy of your passport's biometric page, either a copy of your visa or approved Esta. That'll also help us. And if you are granted a national interest exception waiver, we will email that to you. So make sure your emails are up to date. And then you can show that to the airlines as evidence that you have an exception to be able to travel.
One of the common questions we get from people that have actually received national interest exceptions is, what are the requirements for quarantine in the United States? It's actually a little more complicated. It's a little bit like Switzerland right now. Each locality has their own requirements. Just so that you know, the Center for Disease Control has recommended that international travelers to the United States self-quarantine 14 days after their arrival. However, and this is the big however, this is only a recommendation. We strongly suggest that you review the state and local requirements of the destination of your final destination prior to travel. For example, right now, the state of New York recently announced a 14-day mandatory quarantine for any visitor to the state, including New York City. For more information on these conditions, please visit the Center for Disease Control's COVID website or the state's public health department's website of where you will travel. One quick note, and this is actually something we get asked a lot, do the national interest exceptions exempt you from Swiss quarantine requirements? And unfortunately, that's not the case. You are required to follow Swiss law once you return to Switzerland.
All right, and that's the end of our presentation. We'll now have a question and answer session. If you have questions, please go ahead and type those into the comment box. We also have some questions that were emailed to us earlier that we can answer. Just one note, the focus of this seminar is, of course, on business travel. We'll prioritize business-related questions, and if we have time, we can get to other aspects of the national interest exception questions. Do note we unfortunately cannot answer specific questions on specific cases at this time. So with that, I'm going to open that up to the question and answers.
So one question that was emailed in was, how much do the national interest exceptions cost? Is there an additional fee for those?
Again, one of the things that we want to make sure that you understand is business travel is a priority for the United States. And as such, these national interest exceptions are free as long as you have a valid Esta or US visa.
Okay, and we did get a question that came in. The person is asking about something they're calling the casework authorization form. They want to know if it's still required to apply for a visa, but maybe you could address what is required to apply for a visa.
Sure. If you would visit our embassy website, you will find a link there to apply for a US visa depending on your purpose of travel. And the form is called a DS-160. It's a dynamic form where it depends on the answers you provide, and it will ask for different requirements thereof. So please go to our US Embassy website, find the purpose of travel, and fill out the application, and then the application will dynamically ask you for different required documentation.
Okay.
So another of our participants has asked how long he or she can stay in the U.S.
We approve or deny visas ultimately is up to Custom and Border Protection at the border, who grants entry to determine the duration of stay. And so at the border, when you present your visa, the Custom and Border Protection will grant you length of stay. With a visa, it is typically 6 months on a B1, B2 visa. If you're traveling on Esta, you are limited to 90 days. And then other visas, the work visas such as H-1Bs or Ls or Es, they have various validities. It depends on the type of visa you have.
Okay, then we have an excellent clarifying question. So the person is asking, so hearing about the NIE requirements, I don't think a Swiss employee working for a Swiss firm in the US will qualify for an NIE. Could you clarify on that?
Is that Swiss person traveling back to Switzerland and then going back to the US? Or are they, if they're remaining in the US, they don't need any additional documentation.
Right, so I think it's like, would an L1 or these other ones, would they qualify for an NIE?
Oh, yes. There's been an update on the suspension of travel for folks who are on H-1Bs and Ls, in particular for managers and specialized technicians on the L category. They have exceptions to go to the United States with one caveat. If you are an L1A manager traveling to the US to establish a new company, that is not allowed. If it's an existing, continuing operation, then you qualify for a national interest exception.
And how about for E2s?
E2s also qualify for national interest exception. You are an important bilateral investor, and you are allowed to travel.
Let me just kind of caveat that and really underline this. We really want business travel to the United States. And that's one of the reasons why these national interest exceptions exist, is to make sure that Swiss companies do have the ability to send the resources that they need to be successful in the United States.
There's another NIE question, which is, NIEs are valid for 30 days. Can I enter the US with the same NIE multiple times?
This is a great question. Again, just to kind of caveat is an NIE is actually valid for only one entry into the United States, and it's good for 30 days once it's been granted. So basically, you only have one chance to use that NIE, and it's only good for 30 days. If you do not use it within that 30-day period, then you must reapply.
Okay, and then someone asked, after expiration of the NIE, after the 30 days, do they have to then apply a second time and come back in for another interview?
They do not need to come back for another interview. You don't need to physically come back to the embassy. We do ask that you email us, again, with your purpose of travel and itinerary so that we can set you up in the system for a national interest exception.
Okay, so we have a good clarifying question where a participant says, we've been advised to get in contact with a congressperson of the particular state to get a casework authorization form in order to apply for an NIE. But as we understand it now, I assume after this presentation, this is not necessary. Can you confirm?
So again, this is a kind of a misunderstanding. We've gotten a lot of different advice from different immigration lawyers out there. One of the things that we just strongly recommend is you actually just contact us, because we will be able to help you. We actually are the ones with the authorities to grant national interest exceptions. You do not need to contact a congressional office to get that. We will provide you the answers. We will also provide you with a national interest exception if you meet the requirements.
So we need to send an engineer to Pennsylvania for the commissioning and training of equipment on site there for their business, and they've sold it to GE and there. So that's why. Can we get such an NIE waiver?
Typically, if an equipment was sold to the US and it was contractually obligated to have a specialist go and either install, maintain, or train, those are typically qualified for a national interest exception.
Okay. Another question is, a client had traveled to the US urgently, but was told by the embassy that she couldn't travel on her Esta, but rather needs a visa. Is that still your policy, even though the State Department says otherwise?
So people can travel on Estas. Early on, there were some issues with people traveling on Estas, and we provided suggestions that people apply for visas. But you can travel on Estas, and you can travel on visas. They are equal in our eyes as long as you have a national interest exception.
Okay. So to receive a national interest exception, we send an email to the embassy, and then is there a face-to-face interview that will follow?
If you already have a valid ESTA or a valid visa, then an email is all that it takes. If you need to apply for a visa, then yes, you do need to make a personal appearance at the embassy to apply for the visa. And if you are approved for that visa, then we will process the national interest exception.
And just to kind of add on to that is that we understand that right now timeframes and timelines are very different for different people. Sometimes there is emergency travel, there is need to travel immediately. Please let us know when you do apply for that NIE or that visa to let us know if there's an emergency travel, and we will try to accommodate as necessary.
And the email address that you mentioned before is the one that one would email about their NIE and how to get it? Bern,
yes.
NIV?
Bern, B-E-R-N, N as in Nancy, I as in Isaac, V as in Victor, at state.gov, all one word, Bern, N-I-V.
We've put it in the chat a couple of times.
Great, excellent.
Or you can go to our U.S. Embassy website, the visa section, and that has more information there as well on how to apply.
Okay. Here's a good question. What about the journalists who want to travel to the U.S. to cover the presidential elections? Do they qualify for an NIE?
Again, it depends, and this is where it sort of is question. Journalists on a case-by-case basis we're reviewing. Again, it also depends if you already have a valid a valid ESTA or a valid visa. We are looking at these on a case-by-case basis. There are no built-in exceptions right now, but we do have the authority to look at each case as a whole and the economic impact that it would have either on the Swiss company or on the United States itself.
Okay. And then how long does it take to get an NIE approved or declined?
Typically, we process that within 24 to 36 hours. yeah, if the case is normal, no special processing, within 24, 36 hours, we can get one out. Now, that's only for the national interest exception. If you are applying for a visa, that takes 5 to 7 business days.
Can we watch this stream afterwards too? I have unfortunately missed the beginning of the presentation.
We were going to mention this a little bit later, but we will be trying to record this. It just depends upon the technical quality of it. And more than likely, it will be available. We just need to make sure that we review it so that it meets certain technical requirements for the State Department.
And then someone applied for a visa recently, and they were put on hold, 221G, for the national interest exception rule. Will this have a negative impact on future visa applications?
We fully realize that this is a very special time, and your refusal due to the COVID pandemic does not adversely affect your future applications.
And can I still apply for Esta, or do I need a visa?
You can apply for Estas. Again, there is, in our eyes, there's no difference between the two. Like I said, we've had some unfortunate incidents early on where Estas had some issues. Estas travelers had some issues, but those seem to have been fixed now. So you can apply for an Esta, but you can also apply for a visa. We don't have a preference.
I'm the visa chief, so I am biased, and I want you to apply for visas.
Okay, here's a timeline question. So how long do you have to wait for an interview after the NIE is approved? And maybe you can clarify.
Oh yeah, that's the other way around. You, if you are applying for a visa, you come in for the visa interview first. Right now, we have very short wait times for business travelers. If you want to apply for a visa, you can get an appointment within the week. After the visa interview, it takes about 5 to 7 days for you to receive your visa back by post if you are approved. And then immediately after that, like I said, within 24 to 36 hours, you will receive your national interest exception.
Someone else asks, if I apply for a visa and I get one, will my spouse be allowed to get one and work in the United States?
That depends on the visa classification. There are some visa classifications that allow for work in the United States. There are some visa classifications like the J2 or the H4 where you have to make an application to USCIS in order to work. There are some visa classifications like B1, B2 where you are not allowed to work. And so that is entirely based on the classification question. And when you apply, the consular officer can provide you with more information.
So to support the national interest exception application, do we need a recommendation letter issued by the subsidiary in the US, or can it be issued by the parent company in Switzerland?
Frankly, either one will work. We just want to make sure that there's a clear reason or objective for travel. So if there's an invitation letter from the US subsidiary, great. If there's a letter from your own parent company, that works as well. The only reason why we ask for these letters is to show bona fides of the actual travel and the traveler themselves. And so it's important for you to be able to show who you are and why you're traveling.
Are you currently processing new E2 applications?
Yes.
Again, I just want to reiterate, this E2 is actually a very unique program within Switzerland and is something that we want to promote through the embassy as well through the business community. And so we actually ask you, if you do have, we're probably in the future going to do additional webinars on E2s themselves, but right now we are issuing E2 visas and they are actually eligible for national interest exceptions.
And do you need to do any COVID testing prior to travel?
That will depend on cantonal requirements, and I don't believe any of the states require that yet. But again, the pandemic is very fluid and dynamic. I would just recommend that you keep track of, again, local requirements that are necessary for travel, as well as the requirements at your destination.
Is an interview needed also for Esta owners or people who have Estas already?
No, if you already have a valid Esta, you can actually just send in an email to that Bern NIV email box, and you will not be required for an interview. We will process your email. Again, we ask you to kind of review what we've already talked about, because there are requirements in order to get a national interest exception. Take a look at those. Send us an email, and you do not actually need to come into the for an interview if you actually already have a valid Esta.
Are we processing L visas?
Yes, we are, but here we have some boundaries. If you are traveling on an L1 visa to establish a new operation, then that does not qualify for a national interest exception. If you're traveling on an L for an existing operation, then you likely do qualify for a national interest exception.
Okay.
We have companies in Germany too. Why does it seem like the application process for German citizens to travel to the US is different than the process for Swiss citizens?
We're talking about visa applications or national interest exceptions?
I think it's for companies in Germany versus companies in Switzerland. The process is maybe
just
There's
getting
just
a
difference
visa
in the
in
different
Germany
countries.
versus here.
Yeah, I can't really answer for Germany. I can answer for our operations here in U.S. Embassy Bern, but a compare and contrast will be difficult for us to make.
And then how much does the national interest exception cost?
The national, again, one of the things I mentioned before is that we in the United States, in the U.S. Embassy particularly, are very interested in business travel. And as such, we've made the national interest exception free for business travelers.
And if I'm the spouse or parent of a U.S. citizen, do I need a national interest exception?
No, you can travel to the United States to reunite with your family if you're the spouse of a U.S. citizen or the parent of a U.S. citizen child under the age of 21. You do not need a national interest exception. I would recommend that when you travel, you bring with you documentation that demonstrates your relationship with the U.S. citizen.
Okay, maybe make a last call for questions. Let's see.
Any last calls before we okay,
Yeah.
great.
Okay.
We
got
had
one
another question. I work for a company in Switzerland, but I'm not a Swiss citizen. Are all the rules you've mentioned in this presentation still valid for me?
Yes. If you are what we call a third country national working in Switzerland for a Swiss company, it is still the same procedure, and it depends on if your nationality qualifies for visa waiver travel, if you need a visa, but the procedures are the same.
And actually something that I kind of want to highlight as well is we've had actually a lot of employees of Swiss companies come from Italy, Germany, Austria, and other places because they are employees of Swiss companies and need to go to the United States. We have been able to accommodate some of their requests for national interest exceptions. Again, we do this on a case-by-case basis, but if and when that is necessary, we can accommodate those requests.
Do I need to travel with my U.S. spouse into the United States for the exemption to be valid?
No, you need to demonstrate that you are married to a U.S. citizen, perhaps with a marriage certificate, and that would be sufficient.
And then here's the last question we see. Are grandparents eligible for national interest exceptions?
At this point, that'll depend on purpose of travel. If it's a pure tourism travel, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, that doesn't qualify for a national interest exception. But if it qualifies on other basis for an exception, it may be possible.
And if you do have other questions specifically about this, if you are a grandparent and there's a need to visit the United States, please reach out and contact us. And we do review these cases individually and look at the totality of the evidence that is provided.
Dankeschön. Ich drücke mir Daumen für Sie.
Thank you everyone for participating today. We really appreciate those of you that ask questions. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to try to make this available. We did record it. It just depends upon the quality. If you do have other questions, please feel free to reach out to us at our public mailbox. That's bernniv@state.gov. We're happy to answer this, and we do really want to be able to assist you and facilitate your travel to the United States. Again, I want to highlight for you, business travel is important to the United States at this time. It's critical to the success of every business, every enterprise. It's our business basically to ensure that your continued success in the United States. And we look forward to continuing this partnership with you.